Hey everybody, and welcome back to the show. I'm Johnny Kane with SportsCaster.com. You're listening to Open Mic here on WJR. And if you follow athletics on any level, in particular at the prep level or in college athletics, you know the importance of having a strong AD, an athletics director. It's a job that's not for the faint of heart. It's a job that certainly you've got to have a great understanding, great knowledge of what you want to implement and what you want your university athletics to stand for. And Steve Waterfield is the AD at Oakland University. And he spent some time with Gio Maucheri, a former student from Oakland University, and they talked about all that goes into being a Division I athletic director.
Welcome in, everybody. My name is Giovanni Maucheri here for SportsCaster.com. Now, in college sports, we hear a lot about the athletic director, but unfortunately, it comes usually when something happens to your favorite program and you need somebody to blame. But I know that isn't always justified. So today I wanted to investigate and understand the position of an athletic director. And joining me today to help us in gaining that understanding is the Director of Athletics at Oakland University, Steve Waterfield. Mr. Waterfield, welcome in.
Hey, Giovanni, how are you doing?
Doing fantastic. So I want to start things off. So I know you're only one person, and I understand that the biggest, only highest priority stuff in the athletic department comes to you. So I'm curious, for all that happens in the department, what comes to your desk? What are some of the tasks that you deal with personally, and what are stuff that you delegate? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so I have a great senior staff and great coaches. And so, like you said, a lot of the day-to-day stuff falls under the areas they oversee. It's oftentimes things that either I oversee directly, so I'm the sport administrator for some of our sports, men's basketball, currently women's basketball, tennis, baseball, and so things related specifically to those sports I'm going to handle. Maybe bigger picture governance issues, the House settlement, Horizon League matters kind of work the way up through me. And then just helping folks resolve issues that come up and just kind of thinking through strategically and figuring out how to help them do what they need to do and connecting them with people on campus or representing the department on campus at various meetings or events. And just today, I'm going to meet with a recruit from one sport. And then after this, I have a recruit from another sport. And so it's really, each day's different, but it's being the point person for the department, but also resolving things and helping other folks resolve things and move this forward.
And for your schedule, like throughout the different seasons, how often are you meeting with the head coaches of each sport? Are you kind of keeping in constant contact? Or I'm curious, like, what are some of the matters that you and those head coaches discuss?
Yes, one of the great things about how we have our offices set up is the head coaches, for the most part, are all around my office. And they're all either a few steps away, a phone call away, a text away if things come up. But then the flip side is access to me. I mean, I try to keep my door open as much as possible and invite them to come in, and they just ask me questions or how can I help them out with whatever they need.
And then how are you able to stay in contact with the student athletes? And I'm sure that becomes much more difficult just given, the volume, but is it only through the student athlete advisory committee, SAC, or like how else are you able to keep in touch with the athletes themselves?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I tell people the more responsibility you tend to get in athletics, the further away you get from kind of regular interactions with student athletes. When I started out as an assistant compliance director at Ohio State, I would get interactions with student athletes on a host of things all the time, every day. So what I try to do is spend time going to events and competitions. For the past couple of years, I've invited student athletes to meet with me, to just as a meet and greet, 15 minutes, and as their schedule allows. It's some of the most enjoyable parts of my career, just getting to spend time with student athletes and getting to know them outside of what they're actually doing from a sports standpoint.
And then from what you've seen from the student athlete themselves, a lot is made in the media about how athletes have changed nowadays, and the NIL and transfer portal stuff kind of changes the attitude. But from your perspective, like, has the student athlete, their perspective, their drive, has that really changed in the over those years, or is it overblown, that kind of story?
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's different factors that come into play that didn't exist when I got into this 20 plus years ago. I mean, NIL, the transfer portal, the growth of social media and how that impacts things. To the core, they're the same. They are in a wonderful time in their lives. They are elite athletes that have an opportunity to play Division I athletics and go to school and be around other student athletes and students. And I think that the characteristics that get them here and allow them to succeed and hopefully flourish are the same now than they were 20, 25 years ago. I think a lot of the factors around it are different, but I went to college when email was just becoming a thing. And so going to school and some of the other things change and evolve. But I think at the core, to get to where they've gotten and to what they've accomplished, I think there's some just talents and characteristics that stand the test of time.
So something that I've started to notice when it comes to not just college sports, but sports in general, is I feel like there's a contradictory between the business side and the sport itself, like the purity of competition, we could say. For you having to make a lot of those decisions when it comes to that, do they kind of go against each other, the business and the sport, or do they blend in more smoothly? Because I feel like sometimes they're contradictory.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a tension between the two. Obviously, the business piece of it, the revenue, that's important to be able to put on events and to provide student athletes with resources. And so you have to accept some of whether you call it the commercialization of college athletics or whatever you want to term it. But that's just a reality that revenue is important, and the revenue is end of the day is going to help our sports programs in the department have a better experience or more resources. The other piece to it becomes, I think there's certain things that just aren't really compatible in college athletics. I mean, to me, obviously the prevalence of gambling and legal sports wagering, there's no way I would take money from that. I just philosophically, it's not right. It's against the NCAA rules, but just understanding how that impacts college student athletes and college students, there's not an amount of money realistically that to me makes it okay. And so there's certain things that you just have to focus on kind of the core values and what you believe is right, knowing that ultimately you also want to try to find ways to get revenue to help sports programs, student athletes have an even better competitive academic and personal experience.
And then on the other side of that, like sometimes, for a department, those resources or revenue or whichever it is, isn't there enough. And unfortunately, some programs have to be cut. And I noticed specifically in the Horizon League, Cleveland State had to make a couple of cuts to their wrestling, women's golf, and their softball programs. So for certain programs, like what do those teams have to do to stay alive? Or is this unfortunately just the nature of the business?
Yeah, I think each institution makes decisions based on the institution, and we're all different. I'm obviously a big believer in opportunities and keeping the opportunities that we have. So many of our sports programs have student athletes that pay a large portion of their own tuition, room and board to come here. And if you look at what the tuition revenue is being driven, it far outweighs the athletic scholarship piece of it because most don't get full rides. And so there's actually a net positive from a revenue standpoint by having student athletes. But you also, just with any kind of endeavor, you've got to be mindful of costs. It costs more to take a bus trip now than it did 10 years ago, even though you're taking it to the same place. And so you have to grow revenue, but also be sensitive to how do you build a schedule? How do you focus on the things that are going to have the most impact for the student athlete experience? But to me, reducing opportunities for people to go to school, compete in Division I, and have, I guess, a great opportunity to get a degree. To me, you want to have as many of those opportunities as possible. And when you eliminate sports, it obviously undercuts those opportunities.
And I want to bring this to a more positive note before we finish up here. There was a recent hire in Oakland University athletics, Keisha Newell, for women's basketball. It's the first hire of a basketball coach Oakland's had in the past 12 years. So I'm curious for the process of acquiring a new coach. How does that work? What's the interview like? What are some of the things that you were asking and trying to figure out to ultimately lead to Coach Newell's hire?
Yeah, I think with every head coach search, at least the ones that I do, you start out with a group of candidates and you just vet it. And to me, you cast as wide a net as possible and see who's interested in the position, see who may be interested. And you start with that process and just have initial conversations with candidates. And you just kind of ask, at that point, it's almost as much answering questions that candidates have because they need to learn about Oakland. They need to learn about me. They need to learn about the opportunities. And so it's answering questions, but also just trying to get a general sense of their overall vision. Pick the sport. In this case, it was women's basketball. So you start with that, and slowly that group kind of, you got to narrow it down because you can only hire one person. And although there might be a lot of great candidates, in this case, there were a lot of strong candidates, in my opinion. You have conversations about, okay, what's their approach to recruiting, to building teams, offense, defense? How would you build out a staff? What do you do from a student athlete development standpoint? What are the recruiting pipelines? What situations arise that can be challenging, and how have you addressed and dealt with them? And so you kind of go through that process and learn about them. And ultimately you look at factors that you think are important for success at this specific institution. And end of the day, and very excited to get Coach Newell here, you decide who is, in your opinion, the best candidate for the job now and into the future.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Mr. Waterfield. Hopefully for us watching, get a better perspective as to the thought process and the decisions made by athletic directors. It's a lot on your plate, and it's a difficult job, we know for sure. So I hope those at home get a better understanding of what kind of shoes you're in.
Yeah. Hey, Giovanni, I appreciate the opportunity. And I mean, I'm blessed to have a great job. I tell folks all the time, this is a wonderful job, and it's great to be the AD at Oakland University. Excited to talk with you to kind of shed some light into what a day looks like.
That was Steve Waterfield, Oakland University AD, interviewed by former Oakland University student Giovanni Masheri, who's with SportsCaster.com. If you'd like to hear the entire interview or any part of tonight's show, all you have to do is log on to SportsCaster.com and you can watch the full videos with all our guests. When we come back, two members of the Sportscaster program who work in tandem, Cooper Schoenberg and Carter Lutz, offer up their opinions on the 2025 NBA playoffs. Stay with us.